Today's lesson is about ratios, also known as comparisons. Here's your learning target. It says, I can find equivalent ratios. I can write a ratio for a situation in simplest form. All right, so you should have your interactive math notebook set up for today. Your table of contents is set up. You have your heading and your page numbers. So the first thing that I want you to do on this page is to journal. You're going to time yourself for 2 minutes. Now here's your topic. I want you to think about ratios. You've learned about them for several years now. I want you to just make me a list telling me what you already know about this topic. After 2 minutes, I want you to come back and we'll see what your list is. So go ahead and pause me now, make your list, and then come back when you're ready. So here were some things that I thought were important. Did you remember that ratios compare two quantities? Now, if those quantities have the same label, you have a ratio. If they have different labels, like gallons and miles, then you have a rate. Another thing to remember is that ratios can be simplified. You can almost think about them as a fraction, although keep in mind, we always need two numbers to compare. Because we need two numbers to compare, we can't have any whole numbers, we can't have any mixed numbers. Ratios can be equivalent. And if you have equivalent ratios, they express the same relationship, and they are called a proportion. So let's do a really quick tutorial about your calculator. You're going to want to simplify every ratio that you give to me. And so let's get familiar with some of these keys. So you have an ND key. It is right there. It's normally used for fractions, so the N stands for numerator and the D stands for denominator. But since we can almost think of a ratio as a fraction, we're going to go ahead and use this key to help us simplify. We're going to simplify the ratio 8/12. So what you're going to do first is you're going to hit that ND key. Now you're going to notice that your numerator is blinking. I want you to go ahead and put an 8 in there. And now we're done with the numerator, so we need to move down. So here's your down arrow. I want you to move down to the denominator, and now your cursor is blinking down there. And I want you to put a 12 in your denominator. Now we're all done with your ratio, so we need to tell the calculator to move over. So hit your right arrow key. And now your calculator knows that you are done with that ratio or fraction, and it's wanting to know what to do next. So next, we're going to hit the simp key, that stands for simplify, followed by the enter key. Now, if your display shows you a ratio and has a small downward arrow next to it, that simply means it's not in simplest form yet, and you would simp enter again and continue to do that until your ratio no longer changes or that arrow goes away. As I said before, a ratio compares two quantities. So your answer, while I want it in simplest form, can never be a whole number or a mixed number. So it's easiest if you have a whole number to convert it to a ratio by simply putting a 1 in the denominator position. For example, if your calculator simplified something to the number 4, the ratio would be 4/1. A little more complicated would be if you get a mixed number. And in this case, let's say that your calculator gave you 1.5. That's not a ratio. It's not comparing two numbers. And so you're going to have to use your mixed number key. Now you're going to find that right there. It is second row, first button. And what you're going to do is you're going to use that key to convert 1.5 to 3/2. So earlier I had you complete an exit ticket, and the question was, what about math is hard for you? And so I compiled all the responses from my regular math classes. They're here in this table. You'll notice that most of the students were concerned about fractions and decimals, followed by division, and then word problems and formulas. we're tied for third place. So we're going to use this data to help us write some ratios in simplest form. So I want you to compare all fraction decimal responses. So if I look at my table, all the fraction decimal responses are right here. That's 50. And since that's the first thing that I mentioned, that's going to be my numerator. And I'm going to compare all the fraction decimal responses to the total responses. So the total responses are here, and since I asked for that last, that's going to go on the bottom. All right, so this is not in simplest form. I'm going to take my calculator. I'm going to put a 50 in the numerator, move down, put a 95 in the denominator, move over, hit simp, and enter as many times as you need to get it down into simplest form. I'll give you a second to do that. All right, I think in simplest form, you're going to end up with an answer of 10 over 19. Same data, but this time I want you to compare all division responses to all word problem responses, again in simplest form. So let's find that data. Division responses is right here. There are 27 division responses. Since I asked for that first, it's going to go on top of my ratio. And all word problem responses right here. Since I asked for that second, it goes on the bottom. Now, when you go to simplify that, you might get 3. So you put 27 in the numerator, you move down, you put 9 in the denominator, you moved over, you hit simp and enter, and you got 3. But we can't use 3. 3 is a whole number, and I need a ratio to compare two quantities. So if you remember, you can convert that easily simply by putting a 1 on the bottom. So the answer to my question is the ratio 3 to 1. Another time we had an exit ticket where I asked, what are you most nervous about this year? So I have my table of data for all my regular math classes, and it looks like most kids are nervous about doing well on tests or quizzes. And the least amount was all of the above. All right, so we have all of our data here. We're going to write some ratios. The first ratio that I want you to write, I want you to compare total homework responses to total needing help responses, of course, in simplest form. So let's find that data on our table. Total homework responses, 20. And since I asked for that first, it's going to be my numerator, 20. And needing help responses is here, 12. And since I asked for that second, it's going to go on the bottom. So you're going to pick up your calculator. You're going to put 20 in the numerator, move down, put 12 in the denominator, scooch over, simp, and enter. Now you might get a couple of things here. You might get 1 and 8/12 possibly. That's got two problems. It's a mixed number and it's not in simplest form. If you were to simp and enter that again, you might get 1 and 2/3. Well, now it's simplified, but that still isn't going to work because it's still a mixed number. Can't use those. So you remember that mixed number key, second row down, first key. When you use that key, you'll find that 1 and 2/3 is the same as 5/3. I am comparing two numbers in simplest form. My ratio is 5 to 3. All right, we're going to use the same data, different comparison. I want you to compare the total nothing responses to the total learning the math responses, of course, in simplest form. So the nothing, the kids that are not nervous at all, there are 6. That's my numerator. And the kids that are nervous about learning the math, let's see, that would be 22. I asked for that second, so it's going to go on the bottom. You're going to take your calculator. I want you to put 6 in the numerator. Move down. Put 22 in the denominator. Move over. Hit Simp. Hit Enter. And you should have come up with the ratio 3 to 11. That is the ratio. That is my answer in simplest form. Here's a blast from your past, so a reminder of some previous learning. You might have learned something called cross products. And when you have cross products that are equal, you have two equivalent ratios, also known as a proportion. So for example, if you have 4 to 6 compared to 6 to 24, I can decide if those are equivalent or proportional by looking at the cross products. So if I were to take 4 times 24, I would get 96. And if I took 6 times 16, I would also get 96. So yes, these two ratios are equivalent. They form a proportion. Let's look at this second example. 3/5 compared to 21 35ths. I want to know if they are equivalent or proportional. So I would look at their cross products. If I took 3 times 35, I would get 105. And if I took 5 times 21, I would also get 105. So yes, these two ratios are equivalent. They form a proportion. So if the cross products are equivalent, you have two equivalent ratios. So here we have 3 times 15 is 45. 5 times 9 is 45. Yes, they are equivalent. Here, though, 1 times 5 is 5, and 2 times 3 is 6. So this one, no, they are not equivalent.